Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of Christie's novels and short stories. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, and today we'll be talking about wandering witches, flaming raisins, suspicious topiary, and a lot of drownings. We'll be talking about Hallowe'en Party, the 2010 Poirot episode starring David Suchet as Hercule Poirot. But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Teresa, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to discussing Hallowe'en Party. But before I do, I want to put in a shameless plug for Bookstore Romance Day. That is the third weekend in August. If you are near any kind of a bookstore, particularly an indie bookstore, they may be doing a program for Bookstore Romance Day. I'm going to be doing a signing at Cupboard Maker Books in Enola, Pennsylvania on Sunday, the 21st of August, 2022, from 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. if you want to come out and meet me in person. If you like romance, or romantic thrillers, or romantic suspense, or erotica, or really anything in the vast world of Romancelandia, this is the weekend, the 20th and 21st of August, 2022. This is the weekend to come out to your local indie bookstore.
Like I said, we're going to be talking about Hallowe'en Party. It was a novel Christie wrote in 1969, near the end of her life, and it was not necessarily, it was a good concept, but it wasn't really executed well in the novel, was it?
No, I didn't think so. There were all kinds of loose plot threads, particularly the death of the school teacher, which was brought up, and then it went away completely, as though she had forgotten she had even written it down. By this time, not only was Agatha starting to have more mental issues, she was in her 80s, I think, by this point, or pushing 80.
She late 70s.
Late 70s, early 80s.
79, actually.
Oh, 79, okay.
Yeah.
She was 79. She was starting to fade mentally, you can tell by just reading the book, and she was not getting the editing that she needed, where an editor would have said, "What happened to this?" As you're reading the novel, you were seeing not just the editor looking for loose plot threads, but the editor saying, you have two phrases in the same sentence that mean exactly the same thing. Pick one. The concept is great. It is a wonderful concept. If you are paying attention at all, you will just kick yourself at the end when you find out who done it, because, of course, the answer was right there, told to you. And Poirot realized it immediately as soon as he heard the story about the dropped flower vase. He knew who the murderer was. And if you're thinking at all, you should have gotten it too. It's a great concept.
This was one of those episodes in which the clues were really fairly laid out, including from the very beginning, which of course you don't realize until the end what the ramifications were.
Yes, exactly. And I assume you're talking about the dropped flower vase.
Actually, I'm talking about the wristwatch.
Oh, the wristwatch. Yes, that one shows up fairly early on after Joyce's murder. Yeah, Leopold has the shiny new wristwatch, but that's right after Joyce's murder. Now,
this was an episode that was written by Mark Gatiss, who was one of the writers of the Sherlock series, and he had acted in an episode here as well.
Well, I have to say that Mark Gatiss really improved on the novel. The film was so much better than the novel. Frequently, they are as good. Often they're worse, but in this case, the film was definitely better than the novel.
Right. So we start out in the little village of Woodley Common at a Hallowe'en party to which Ariadne Oliver was invited to help prepare a Halloween party for the children. So there's bobbing for apples and Snapdragon as well. And
I thought the Snapdragon
games
was fascinating. I'd never heard of one of these before. And this is one of those English things. And I can't imagine anybody doing it today, because we'd all be terrified that, oh my God, you'll invite the neighbor's kids over to stick their hands in burning alcohol to snatch raisins, and you can just see the lawsuits coming. And yet this was something that Agatha had grown up with, because of course she must have seen this, because this isn't something that I would think you would think of as an entertainment for children, that you have a big dish, a big ceramic dish full of raisins heaped high, and then you pour alcohol over it and light it on fire, and then you stick your fingers in to grab the burning raisins.
Yeah.
Just can't imagine that.
And eat them.
And eat the burning raisins.
Raisins and eating them. And meanwhile, the children are chanting some rhyme about the dragon biting you, I guess. And dragons play a theme in this as well, because the topiary, this is set at Beckley Park, which has this beautiful topiary garden.
Very, very impressive topiary. There are dragon's teeth hedges,
right,
as the best way to describe it. Dragon's teeth hedges, where the boxwood has been very carefully shaped, and they must have clipped it like one day in front of the actual filming, because it was perfect. It had been perfectly sheared. There wasn't a leaf out of place. And having seen topiary gardens, Longwood Gardens has a very nice topiary assortment. Box and yew are living plants, and you shear them close, and then within 1 week, 2 weeks, they are already starting to push out past their shape. If you want that immaculate shape, you have to shear faithfully, and you take your pictures right after you shear.
So the reason why I go back to the Snapdragon is that throughout the episode, they repeat the children chanting in the background. You could see it in the subtitles.
Yeah, I saw it in the subtitles. I didn't hear it.
So it's very subtle.
It's very, very subtle. Maybe if you have better hearing than I do, or you turn up your sound a lot louder, you'll actually hear it. But in general, they would subtitle it, even though I didn't hear a darn thing. It was a very creepy rhyme, and I don't know if this is a traditional rhyme that you use with a Snapdragon or if this is something that Mark Gatiss came up with, but it's wonderfully appropriate, it's wonderfully creepy, and it makes for a great group activity, although, again, I cannot see anybody in the United States doing this because of fear of lawsuits and arson. You know, you're encouraging little pyros with this, but it looked great.
Like they need encouragement, judging by our children's behavior when they were younger, too.
No, they don't need any encouragement to light fires. As long as they do it outside on the sidewalk, you're okay.
But the purpose behind the Snapdragon game, at least as far as the story is concerned, is it distracts everybody. It's done in a darkened room. So what ends up happening is that we have one of the characters, one of the children, Joyce Reynolds, who had before at the Bobbing of the Apples game had bragged that she had witnessed a murder.
And she was showing off. Joyce was showing off. You can tell that Joyce is showing off. And again, this is subtly done. Joyce is a liar. Everyone recognizes that Joyce tells lies, Joyce tells stories, because nobody took her seriously. Nobody in that room, including her own brother and her mother, nobody in that room took Joyce seriously. Oh, I saw a murder. They all know better.
Yeah, this was something that happened years ago, and she said, at the time I didn't think it was a murder, but now I realize it is, and nobody believes her. But anyway, during the game of Snapdragon, she disappears, and a maid finds her drowned in the Bobbing for Apples tub.
And think about this. This is where the wonderful clue comes in that is right there, right in front of you. If you're going to hold a healthy 13-year-old girl down in the water, even if she is startled, you're going to get wet.
Mm-hmm. And that's what Poirot finds. When I was looking through the clips afterwards, you could see him in the room, bending down, testing the rug.
Which is soaked with water.
And there was even a comment about that later, about how it will ruin the rug.
The same thing is true in the novel. They do make a point of, Agatha does make a point of saying everything is going to be soaking wet.
So what we have here are three families. We have the Butlers, Judith Butler and Miranda.
Yep.
As well. Miranda is kind of...
She's a fey child is the best way to describe it. She lives in a world of her own, a world full of magic and animals and birds and flowers and plants. She and Joyce were friends, but she is also, and this was very subtly done, you can see how credulous Miranda is, because everyone else, including the vicar, rolls their eyes about Joyce telling stories, including the one about Joyce going off to India and meeting Maharajas and tigers. Miranda believed Joyce. Miranda believes what she's told because Miranda is the kind of person she wouldn't dream of telling lies, and so she assumes neither does anyone else.
Mm-hmm. And then we have the Drake family, and the Drake family owns the home that the murder took place in.
Yes.
They inherited this big home with the beautiful topiary.
Yes, that's Rowena Drake, and her two children, Frances and Edmund, were added into the text, so you get a pair of snapping siblings who look like they are more than old enough to have married and left by now, but they are still living off of mom because...
Well, she has the money.
She has the money, and the daughter looks like she really needs to be under some man's thumb, and the son really needs to grow a pair and start becoming self-supporting, and even his own mother doesn't think of him as being masculine. They don't really figure into the novel, but they add background interest.
And the Drake family, because of the home, the home was the subject of a will battle that actually plays a role in the story.
Yes, the home originally belonged to Mrs. Drake's mother-in-law, Mrs. Llewellyn Smith, and she was not mother-in-law. That's the wrong word. It's a little bit complicated because Mrs. Drake's husband is of course dead. He was run over, apparently while out walking, run over by joyriding teenagers, and nobody ever found out who killed him. And in the novel, he was a closer relative to Mrs. Llewellyn Smith than Rowena was. And this is where, knowing how many degrees of consanguinity away you are and having big family trees, you can see it. In English, we have to use the word cousin for everything. And it gets very complicated very quickly as to, are you a third cousin twice removed?
But anyway, Mrs. Llewellyn Smith...
She had the money. She had buckets of money. And she had the fabulous garden that she paid Michael Garfield to turn a field, the backyard, into this really stunning garden, an amazing garden, the kind of garden that people make pilgrimages to see because it is so beautiful, it is so impressive, it is so wonderful.
But the old lady was dying, she was ill, and they brought in an au pair, thanks to the minister from Czechoslovakia, yes. And the minister, this would be... Reverend Cottrell.
Reverend Cottrell. He was an added character. But I thought this was actually a good addition because it said how Olga got there. And I could see a minister arranging to bring European girls over to England to be au pairs and companions. They can earn a little bit of money. And amazingly, I was absolutely amazed by this. I was really expecting that it would turn out that he was a white slaving vicar, just like we had the white slaving nun in Appointment with Death. I really expected to discover that Reverend Cottrell was an evil man because, of course, as a vicar of the Episcopalian Church, he had to be evil, but he wasn't. He was apparently a decent man who saw an opportunity to help girls who wanted maybe a little bit more out of life than marrying the boy next door in some godforsaken Balkans country, coming to England, getting a little bit of education, learning a little bit of English, making some money, sending it home, having a different opportunity if they wanted. And one of the girls that he brought over was, of course, Olga, who worked for Mrs. Llewellyn Smith. And Olga disappeared. Olga forged a will she forged a codicil to Mrs. Llewellyn Smith's will that would let her inherit everything, and it turned out to be a forgery, and then Olga disappeared. Reverend Cottrell stopped doing the program after that because, of course, word gets around that, hey, you send your daughter off to England to be an au pair, and she'll be accused of forgery, and she'll disappear, and nobody will ever know where she went.
Right. And now the third family is the Reynolds family, which is Mrs. Reynolds, who was a widow, and then Joyce and Leopold, Joyce being the girl that was drowned at the Halloween party, and Leopold...
her creepy brother.
And all I can think of is the Leopold and Loeb case in the Roaring '20s, in which Leopold was a child murderer. And what a great name Agatha picked for this one, because, boy, Leopold is not really a common name.
No, it's not a common name, certainly not in the English-speaking world. It may be a common name in another language, but not in English. Mrs. Reynolds was poorly handled. Again, I really don't believe anybody in Hollywood has any understanding of religious faith. Mrs. Reynolds is a devout woman, okay? But apparently Mark Gaddis thinks that if you are a devout Christian, you don't grieve when your children are murdered. Instead, you quote the Bible and smile beatifically because you're all going to be reunited in the bosom of Abraham by and by. That rang so falsely that there's Mrs. Reynolds quoting Job to Reverend Cottrell and various other parts of the King James Bible, basically to say, I don't care that my daughter was murdered. I don't care that my son was murdered. I don't care that they were drowned. And I'm perfectly fine with that because I'm a Christian. No. It really felt false in what is otherwise a really excellent film, where you felt like you could believe everybody there on the screen as being a real person, a fully rounded person with real emotions. That was so false. That was so fake. That was so, I don't understand that people who can be devout and know that they're going to be reunited in heaven will still be devastated emotionally because their daughter is dead.
Well, especially so soon after it happened, too.
That's right. I mean, you would still be weeping and sobbing, and it isn't something you get over quickly. Being a Christian or being a devout Muslim or being a devout Jew or being a devout Hindu or anything does not change the fact that you grieve when your children are murdered. First she's a widow, she lost her husband, and then her daughter, and then her son. Mm-hmm. You don't think that she would be having to be sedated? Oh, well, she's a Christian, so she won't care.
Well,
you idiot!
You're just going to reach right through and slap Mark at us, aren't you? You're just going to do this next.
So you have to be grateful when somebody like Reverend Cottrell is handled reasonably well, where he is trying to do the right thing, and it turns out that he was trying to do the right thing, and he didn't have ulterior motives of the sex trade and robbing people. Which I was really expecting, because that's what happens every time you watch anything these days.
Well, and also Mrs. Goodbody, who was the local witch, was accusing him as well, but she was running around accusing everybody of having ulterior motives too. So that was a nice little red herring that they planted. Yeah,
she was a good character. Really enjoyed seeing Mrs. Goodbody. In some ways, she lost some of her complexity, because in the novel, she has a fairly good idea what happened to Olga. But again, she's a peripheral character. She's a hedge witch, and she already knows she's not going to be taken seriously. Mm-hmm. When she says, "Ding dong, Dell, pussy's in the well." She knew where Olga's body was, because when young girls disappear, I shouldn't say young girls, but when young women disappear suddenly and they have family, but they don't go back to their family, you can almost guarantee they're dead. That's what happens. And if you have a charming English village out there in the countryside, and you've got hillsides, and you've got abandoned wells, and you've got ponds, well, you know where the body's going to go. Mm-hmm. Bodies go in wells. Just like if you are trying to get rid of a car, there are two places where you can get rid of a car and hide it. And you can leave the body in the trunk. And that is in the water or long-term airport parking, because nobody looks.
Anyway, Poirot comes to Woodley Common
because Ariadne is hugely upset. Oh my God, this girl was murdered, drowned.
But he runs into problems with Inspector Raglan, of course, who suspects that it's a local tramp who might have done it. So.
Yeah, because why would it be? Again, you choose the most likely answer, because Inspector Raglan, like everyone else in Woodley Common, knows Joyce is a liar. And he assumes that everybody knows that Joyce is a liar. And so, of course, why would anybody murder Joyce for saying, "I saw a murder"? And yet Joyce is still murdered. Right. And that's the way Poirot looks at it.
He sees the connection, cause and effect, because if it was a passing tramp, which doesn't seem likely anyway, although they did have Mrs. Goodbody burst into the room from the French windows, which apparently they never seem to be locked in England.
Nobody ever locks their
French doors or their bedroom doors or even their front doors.
Yeah, so, nobody ever locks a damn door there.
Yes, everybody bursts into the doors like in a Seinfeld episode. But Mrs. Goodbody comes in and she paints herself green, and she says she's a witch and is willing to tell fortunes, and she gets hustled out because heaven forbid that the children be exposed to this on Halloween. Is just, protective parents are protective parents. Although, let them plunge their hands into flaming raisins? Sure, why not? Talk to a witch? Oh, no. But it's that kind of episode. And the whole episode was shot with this very creepy Halloween vibe. It's actually a Halloween-themed episode.
Oh, yes. Very creepy vibe. Rotting pumpkins, the leaves, skittering leaves, the changing of the light levels. The music was wonderfully atmospheric and creepy. Other than Mrs. Reynolds, everything just worked. It fired on all cylinders from start to finish. And you will just kick yourself. Just like you do if you've read the novel, you will just kick yourself when you realize, of course, that's who the murderer was. It had to be that person, because if you're going to drown a child in a bucket of water, you're going to get wet.
So how do you pass that dampness off?
And there's a lot of drownings in this film because, of course, Joyce is drowned in the bucket for bobbing apples. Her brother Leopold is drowned in the pond. And there was the school teacher. This is the red herring that Agatha introduced and then completely forgot about in the novel. The school teacher drowns herself. And it was and I thought that was very sensitively handled.
Yeah.
It was a minor red herring, but there it was. And, Mark Gatiss really tied in all of the other bits, such as Leslie Ferrars. And Leslie used to be a man's name. It isn't anymore. But he was the lawyer's assistant. And he was knifed because of the way he was catting around, and nobody really knew who did it. But it turned out it was connected, of course, to the forging of the will to Mrs. Llewellyn Smith's estate. Everything tied in so beautifully. The creepy gates and the sound of the noise and the wind. And it really was a pleasure also seeing a Poirot episode that did not take place in early June. This was a different time of the year.
Right. I'll also mention in passing, because before we leave the lesbian subplot, the teacher who mourned her, Miss Whittaker, is played by Fenella Woolgar.
Oh, yes, she was in the Doctor Who episode playing Agatha Christie in The Unicorn and the Wasp. And she made an excellent Agatha Christie there. And she made an excellent grieving school teacher here.
Yeah.
She is grieving, and she has to grieve silently and quietly.
Again, we get to see Poirot actually doing real detecting here, because she said that the woman who drowned herself, that I never realized how much she loved me until after. And from that, he discerned that there must have been a suicide note left,
yes,
but never found.
Yes. Although I don't know how easy it would be to drown yourself unless you swim out into the ocean.
Virginia Woolf did it. She packed her pockets with rocks and went out and just let herself settle, and I guess she was able to do it, so it is possible.
I guess so. One of the complaints that I know that people have about this is they cannot understand how Judith Butler could conceal the fact that she had, why she would bother concealing the fact that she had a daughter out of wedlock. That she claims that she had a husband who's dead. And I thought that was also beautifully handled, that Judith Butler has mentioned, Miranda's father, he died before Miranda was born. But we see Poirot looking at the pictures on the mantelpiece, and there is no picture of Miranda's father. All these other pictures, there is no picture of Miranda's father, and that tells to him that whoever Dad was, Judith doesn't want to memorialize him because, well, maybe he's not dead. And again, this is where the culture has changed so much. When Agatha published Hallowe'en Party in 1969, nice middle-class women did not really like to admit to their illegitimate children. Changing the time setting back to 1937, over 30 years earlier, nice middle-class English women really didn't want to admit that they'd had a torrid affair and got knocked up and had their baby quietly and claimed that they were a widow, because you just didn't do that. And this is a change in culture that is so strong that today, looking at it, we can't really understand why she would lie. Of course she lied. That's the only thing she would be able to do. And of course she is settled someplace where she has no family around her, because her family would all say, you slut. You got knocked up. Why didn't you give the baby up for adoption? How could you have done such a thing? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. She had to go someplace where nobody knew her, because only people who didn't know her would accept her story that, oh, I was widowed.
Yeah. And with wartime, and he said he was a pilot and died in a plane crash, it was easy to accept.
Oh, yeah, it was very easy to accept. And it wouldn't have been World War I either, because 1937, Miranda is 13, so 1937, that would be 1924. 1924, so yeah, it wouldn't have been World War I, but it could still have been very easily a pilot testing planes, because again, airplane testing they die all the time testing airplanes.
The Lindbergh flight about that time as well. So there were plenty of pilots who were disappearing.
Oh yeah. Testing airplanes is a very risky business even today.
Yep. And the Halloween theme plays out right to the end of the story, where the Poirot, the situation where he gathers everybody and accuses them and reveals who done it.
Yeah, and when you're watching this, you are going to wonder why Inspector Raglan drags off our main villain. And then Poirot says, but wait, there's more. Let me tell you a story. And you discover, of course, that Inspector Raglan, they've set this up in advance. Inspector Raglan is waiting right outside the door.
Right. He's sitting, and Poirot's sitting in front of the fireplace, and some of the people are still in their night robes because they hit. There's this little scene where Miranda runs off to meet with the gardener. And again, this is a situation where they're going to have a little magic ceremony. And remember,
Miranda is credulous. She clearly believes in nature spirits. She's not worldly. She is not worldly, not experienced. Her mother has done her very best to protect her. And Miranda does not know something that the gardener and her mother know. She does not know who her father actually is. They know, but neither of them, for reasons of their own, told her.
Yeah.
And so you have this bond. And she is willing to believe this man who tells her what she wants to hear. She is credulous. She is one of the people who says, I believe, Joyce went to India. Oh my God, how fabulous and exciting it was. She met Maharajas and saw tigers. And everyone else in Woodley Common says, oh yeah, Joyce, what a liar.
But this was also an instance where the Poirot series, they really outdid themselves. I mean, the casting has to be spot on if you really want to convey the story. I don't know this fella, Julian Rend-Tut.
He plays Michael, the fabulous landscape gardener, and my God, does he give off creepy vibes.
Well, he gives off creepy vibes, but he's also incredibly charming. So he's well-spoken. He talks well. There's a scene between him and Poirot as Poirot takes the train to Woodley Common because he was in Greece and has been gone for a while.
He's been gone for a little while. He was looking, as it turns out, he was looking at islands in Greece because, of course, he wants to eventually end up with an enormous pile of money so that he can turn a Greek island into a garden suitable for gods.
Mm-hmm.
What matters to Michael Garfield more than anything else in the world is beauty, the beauty of nature, to not just be able to look at a beautiful piece of scenery. There is a big difference between a garden and a wilderness. A garden is a piece of art. It is a piece of performance art, and it only stays the way you want it for a very short time. And because it is outdoors and because it is year-round, you have to think about how a garden looks in January, in June, in October. Every season of the year, your garden will look different. Gardening is very, very much an art, at least more, I think, in a way than painting, because when you paint a picture, you're done. When you write a symphony, you can have different people playing it with different instrumentations, but the notes don't really change. The garden is going to change whether you do anything or not, because the plants will grow, the seasons will change, the wind will come through and knock down one of the trees, the topiary has to be trimmed every 3 weeks to keep that perfect shape. A garden demands continuous maintenance, and it is art, and he is an artist, and nothing matters to him more than beauty. Beauty that he controls.
It also turns out that Miranda was the source of the story, that Joyce, and this is such an obvious thing in retrospect, that Joyce took Miranda's story.
Because they shared their secrets. And who is it who sits in the garden and watches the birds and the squirrels and the little animals? Why, it's Miranda, of course.
Yep.
Miranda is the one who's outside in all kinds of weather watching, not Joyce. And Joyce and Miranda shared their secrets.
So Miranda becomes a threat because, as we know, and again, this is a spoiler-heavy episode, Michael Garfield was in on the various murders in order for Rowena to keep the estate.
And all the lovely money.
And so he lures Miranda out into this moonlit ceremony. This was near Guy Fawkes night as well, apparently.
Yes, and he's going to poison her and cut her throat.
Right.
Because he is going to sacrifice her to beauty, and this is one of the things the episode didn't quite bring out as well as it could have, the way it did in the novel. Miranda feels guilty over Joyce's death. She told Joyce her secret, and then Joyce revealed it, pretending it was her own, and Joyce got murdered, and then Leopold got murdered, and Miranda feels guilty, and sacrifices have to be made, and guilt has to be atoned. She feels things very, very strongly. So Michael Garfield takes advantage of that. He needs to remove a loose end because he doesn't care about anyone other than himself and the beauty that he can create and force to happen with his own hands.
I always thought that Miranda was based on Agatha kind of looking at herself as a child, because she was a girl who would wander the grounds of Ashfield, telling herself stories, and she seemed to have that kind of distant quality at times. And, you know, she turned it up to 11 for Miranda, of course.
Oh, yeah, somebody living in a world of their own, living in a world of her own.
And, you know, her relationship with her mother was a lot like the relationship between Michael and Miranda. They had this almost psychic bond between the two, where her mother could look at Agatha and know what she was thinking. And maybe that was applied to this as well.
It's very possible. It's very possible.
But anyway, before the sacrifice could be made, Poirot rescues them, drags them all back.
The police show up in the garden and they rescue Miranda, and then Poirot does the summation, and then you find out who the other villain is, which is, of course, Rowena Drake, a passionate woman. And she was having a torrid affair. A torrid affair with Michael Garfield. Yes, Michael ran over her husband because, well, you just have to remove inconvenient husbands somehow.
When necessary, and then the divorce won't go through. Well, this is another way of handling it.
Well, and also then you don't lose any of the money.
Lovely
and of course,
money.
then you wonder what happens after this, because the film gave Rowena 2 children. They have just discovered that Mom has been carrying on with the gardener. Mom had Dad murdered. Mom drowned at least one person. You're not sure exactly how many people Rowena killed and how many people Michael Garfield killed and how many of them they killed together.
Yeah.
Because certainly Rowena murdered Joyce by herself, but I'm not sure who held Leopold underwater. And it was Michael Garfield.
It was Michael, because Michael had the watch.
Oh, right.
He gave the watch to Rowena.
Okay, right. So Michael got
ran
over
for
Rowena's husband. Michael ran over Rowena's husband. Michael knifed Olga. Michael knifed Leslie Farrar, the solicitor. And Michael drowned Leopold. And Rowena drowned Joyce. And Rowena probably is the one who poisoned Mrs. Llewellyn Smith to make sure that even though she was a sick old lady, she didn't want to wait any longer. And so she made sure that she died a little earlier than she otherwise would have.
So we have Frances and Edmund surrounded by all these murders, inheriting the lovely money and the property, and also getting a half-sister in Miranda. Sort of.
No, Miranda's not a blood
right.
relative, because she is not related. She is Michael Garfield's daughter. Miranda is unrelated to them. Other than Miranda is the daughter of Michael Garfield, the man who was banging Mom.
Which makes family reunions really interesting from here on out.
Yes, they would be.
As you can probably guess, this is a highly recommended episode.
It was fun. We really enjoyed it, and I think you'll really enjoy it too.
Yep.
Much, much better than the book, and I don't often say that.
So we've come to the end of another episode.
Yes, and let me again remind you all that Bookstore Romance Day is coming up this weekend, the 20th and 21st of August in 2022. And if you want to meet me as Odessa Moon, come on out to Cupboard Maker Books in Enola from 11 o'clock until 1 o'clock. That's Sunday, the 21st of August, 2022.
And if you want to see us at any other time, you come to peschelpress.com and take a look at our appearances calendar. It's right on the front page. Easy
and you
to
can
find.
follow us on Instagram too.
That's right, at Peschel_press. Now, what's the next? Oh, the Clocks is the next episode.
The Clocks is going to be the next episode. Yes, we're going to see that Friday evening. It's a novel that I enjoyed very much. It's interesting because she wrote The Clocks only a couple of years before Hallowe'en Party, and I thought The Clocks was much more coherent. It was everything tied together very nicely, and I'm looking forward to seeing that episode.
And we'll talk about it next time on Agatha Christie She Watched. This is Bill Peschel.
And Teresa.
And we'll see you at the movies. Agatha Christie She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel. Produced by Bill Peschel. Theme song, Call to Adventure by Kevin MacLeod. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, You can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.